The arrival of the young teacher. The village of Odo-Aye had always been a place of rich tradition, where elders spoke in proverbs and every child grew up learning the ways of their ancestors. It was a peaceful land, surrounded by lush forests and fertile fields, where people lived simple but fulfilling lives. Yet, beneath the surface of its tranquility, a silent crisis brewed. For years, the village girls had been leaving school too soon, not because they wanted to, but because their futures had already been decided for them. Many were married off at an early age, their dreams swallowed by the expectations of tradition. Some, lacking proper education, found themselves with child before they even understood what motherhood truly meant. It was a cycle that had lasted generations, and though some whispered that change was needed, no one dared to act. Until the government stepped in. The village elders had sent countless pleas to the city, requesting for a teacher who could save their daughters from a fate they did not choose. And so, one fateful morning, Mr. Jide arrived. He came in a bus filled with supplies, his suitcase clutched in one hand and a confident smile on his face. He was not an old man, as some had expected, but young and full of energy, barely past his mid-20s. His clothes were neatly pressed, and his eyes held the light of a man who had seen the world beyond the village's borders. The villagers gathered under the great baobab tree to welcome him, their faces filled with hope and curiosity. Baba Alaid, the oldest and most respected elder, stepped forward, clearing his throat before speaking. "Teacher Jide," he said, his voice deep and steady. "You have been sent to us as an answer to our prayers. Our daughters are like young plants, but the soil they grow in is filled with thorns. We trust that you will guide them, teach them, and keep them safe." Jide bowed respectfully, his voice smooth and reassuring. "It is my honor to be here, Baba. I will do my best to ensure that no girl is left behind in her education. They will learn not just from books, but about life itself." A cheer erupted from the crowd, and just like that, Mr. Jide became a figure of admiration. His first days in the village were met with eager smiles. The parents respected him, the elders praised him, and most importantly, the girls listened to him. A teacher like no other. Unlike the strict teachers who had come before him, Jide's methods were refreshing. He didn't just write on the blackboard and expect the students to copy mindlessly, he made learning exciting. He told stories that brought history to life, he asked riddles that made their minds sharper, and he spoke gently instead of scolding them for mistakes. The girls, who had once dreaded school, now came eagerly, their wooden benches filled before the sun had even fully risen. "Education is the key to a brighter future," Jide often told them. "No matter what happens, never let anyone take it away from you." He introduced new ideas, things the village had never seen before. Lessons on hygiene, self-care, and how to protect oneself in a world that was not always kind to young girls. "It is your right to choose your future," he would say, his eyes scanning the eager faces of his students. Never forget that. For the first time in generations, the girls of Odo-Aye began to dream beyond marriage and motherhood. They imagined becoming doctors, teachers, and leaders, things no woman in their family had ever been before. The power of charm. But it wasn't just Jide's knowledge that captivated the girls, it was him. His smooth voice, his gentle smile, the way he spoke as if each of them was special. They hung on his every word, their young hearts fluttering in ways they did not understand. "He's different from the old teachers," Aduni, one of the brightest students, whispered to her friend Mariel one afternoon. "Yes," Mariel agreed, her eyes shining. "He treats us like we matter." Little did they know, their admiration was exactly what Jide wanted. At first, it was harmless, a playful compliment here, a reassuring touch there. A word of praise whispered just a little too softly. "You're very intelligent," he told Aduni one day, smiling down at her. "I see great things in your future." She blushed, not realizing the danger of trusting a man too much. A whisper of darkness. For weeks, everything seemed perfect. The girls excelled in their studies, the parents slept peacefully, believing their daughters were in safe hands. But one evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, something shifted. Jide stood before his class, his expression thoughtful. "We've learned so much in these past few weeks," he said, looking at the girls with warm admiration. "But there are some things that cannot be understood from books alone." The girls tilted their heads in curiosity. "What do you mean, teacher?" Aduni asked. Jide smiled. "Some lessons are better learned in private. If you are truly serious about your education, I will offer special tutoring sessions, one-on-one." The girls exchanged glances, uncertain. Jide's voice was calm, his words reassuring. "Don't be afraid," he said. "This is only for those who wish to go beyond what is taught in class. For those who wish to understand the world in ways no one else can teach you." Silence fell over the group. Then, one girl hesitantly raised her hand. I would like to learn more," she said. Jide smiled, pleased. "Good," he said. "We will begin tomorrow evening, after the others have gone home." No one sensed the danger. No one knew that the man they had welcomed was not who he seemed to be. And so, as the stars blinked awake in the night sky, the first step into darkness was taken. The teacher's influence. The village of Odo-Aye had long believed in the wisdom of its elders, the strength of its warriors, and the innocence of its daughters. But belief was not enough to shield them from the unseen danger that had entered their midst. For weeks, Mr. Jide's presence had transformed the village school. Girls who once avoided lessons now ran eagerly to class, their minds hungry for knowledge. The parents were grateful. The elders were pleased. And the girls were enchanted. But beneath the surface of admiration, Jide's influence was growing into something much darker. A mentor like no other. Jide was not like the old teachers, and that was why the girls adored him. He never shouted. He never punished them harshly. He praised them, encouraged them, and made them feel special. Education is not just about books, he told them one afternoon beneath the great baobab tree. It is about understanding life. The girls nodded eagerly, trusting his every word. It started small, a gentle touch on the shoulder, a lingering smile, a whispered compliment that felt different from before. But as the days passed, Jide's charisma became a spell, and the girls fell deeper under his influence. They looked forward to his attention. They blushed when he praised them. And when he offered private tutoring sessions, many felt honored to be chosen. The first private lesson. The first girl to attend was Aduni, the brightest student in class. She arrived in the evening, as instructed, her heart pounding with excitement. "Sit down," Jide said gently, gesturing to the wooden chair in the dimly lit room. Aduni obeyed, her hands folded in her lap. "You are very intelligent, Aduni," Jide said, his voice softer than usual. "But intelligence is not enough. A woman must also understand how the world works." Aduni nodded eagerly. "Yes, teacher." Jide leaned closer. "Some things cannot be taught in public," he said. "They must be learned privately." Aduni hesitated, sensing something was different. Jide smiled. "You trust me, don't you?" Aduni nodded slowly. "Good," he whispered. "Then let me teach you something only the wisest women know." The room seemed smaller. The air felt heavier. And before Aduni could truly understand what was happening, she had stepped into the shadows without realizing it. Silence is the greatest weapon. The next morning, Aduni sat quietly in class. She did not raise her hand. She did not laugh with the other girls. Something inside her had changed. "Aduni, are you okay?" Maria whispered beside her. Aduni forced a smile. I'm fine, she said. But her eyes told a different story. Jide, watching from the front of the classroom, gave her a knowing look. A warning. A reminder. And Aduni, afraid of what might happen if she spoke, lowered her gaze and remained silent. The pattern repeats. One by one, the other girls were called for their private lessons. One by one, they entered Jide's room full of trust. And one by one, they left changed, confused, and silent. The once lively schoolyard became quieter. The girls avoided each other's eyes. But no one spoke. Because Jide had already warned them. This is part of your education, he had told them, his voice gentle but firm. A woman must keep her secrets. Only foolish girls run their mouths, and foolish girls ruin their own futures. The words echoed in their minds, trapping them in a prison of silence. An unseen watcher. But not everyone was blind to what was happening. There was one boy in the village who noticed the change, Tond, Aduni's younger brother. He had always been mischievous, known for climbing trees and sneaking into places he shouldn't be. And one evening, as he waited for his sister to walk home, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Jide led another girl into his room, his hand resting too comfortably on her shoulder. Tond froze, his sharp mind connecting the dots. Why do the girls leave Jide's lessons looking so different? Why are they so quiet? That night, Tond did not sleep. He had discovered a secret. And he knew he had to do something. But who would believe a boy? The village loved Jide. The girls were too afraid to speak. And if Tond wasn't careful, he could end up in danger himself. But one thing was certain, he couldn't let this continue. And so, the young boy made a dangerous decision. The hidden shadows. The village of Odo-Aye had always been a place where people trusted one another. The elders had wisdom, the warriors had strength, and the mothers had intuition. But even in the safest of places, darkness can grow in plain sight. And it had been growing, hidden behind the gentle smile of Mr. Jide. Tond's suspicion grows. Tond was only 13 years old, but he was sharp as a blade. He had always been curious, quick-witted, and too stubborn to ignore what others refused to see. After that evening, when he had seen Jide leading yet another girl into his room, something in his mind refused to rest. That night, as he lay on his straw mat, he thought about everything that had been happening. Why had the girls changed? Why did they avoid looking at each other? Why did they stop laughing and speaking freely? His own sister, Aduni, had stopped talking to him. Before, she had been full of dreams and stories, always telling him about how she would become the first woman in the village to attend the city university. But now, she barely spoke. She barely ate. And when he asked her about Mr. Jide, she only shook her head and walked away. Something was wrong. And Tond was going to find out what it was. A secret uncovered. The next day, Tond skipped his chores. Instead, he hid behind the school building, waiting, watching. He saw the girls enter Jide's room, one by one. He saw them come out looking pale and silent. And when no one was looking, he crept closer to the classroom window, heart pounding in his chest. What he saw inside made his blood run cold. Jide was too close to the girl. His hand rested on her arm, his voice was low and smooth, his smile was too kind, too knowing. Tond's fist clenched. He didn't understand everything. But he understood enough. This was not teaching. This was not right. And now, he had proof. A dangerous plan. That night, Tond could not stay silent any longer. He cornered his sister Aduni in their small hut, his voice sharp. I know what's happening, he said. I saw it with my own eyes. Aduni froze. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Ton grabbed her hand. "Tell me the truth," he begged. "Tell me what Jide has done." Aduni's eyes filled with tears. But she shook her head. "You don't understand," she whispered. "No one will believe us." "Then let me tell Baba-Aye. Let me tell the elders." "No." Aduni's voice rose sharply, fear flashing in her eyes. Ton took a step back, stunned. He said, "If we tell anyone," Aduni whispered, voice trembling, "we will be the ones to suffer." Ton felt rage build in his chest. Jide had not only harmed them, he had also made them afraid of speaking the truth. But Ton was not afraid. He would do what the girls couldn't. He would bring the truth into the light, even if it meant putting himself in danger. The whisper begins. Ton was clever. He knew that if he ran straight to the elders, they might not believe him. Jide was too well respected. His charm was too strong. So, he started with someone the village trusted even more. Mama Folek. She was not just a mother, she was a warrior in her own right. A woman whose voice carried weight, whose words could not be ignored. Ton approached her hut at dusk, his hands trembling. "Mama Folek," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have something to tell you." She looked at him carefully, her sharp eyes seeing the fear in his face. "Speak, child," she said. "And tell me only the truth." Ton took a deep breath, and told her everything. The private lessons. The girl's silence. The things he had seen with his own eyes. Mama Folek listened without interrupting. But her face slowly hardened. And when Ton was finished, she said just one thing. "The elders must hear this. At once." The gathering of mothers. Mama Folek did not waste time. She went house to house, gathering the mothers of the girls. One by one, they came together under the great baobab tree, their faces dark with fear and fury. Their daughters had suffered in silence. But now, the truth was out. And justice would be demanded. "We must go to the elders," one mother said, her voice shaking. "No," Mama Folek said. "Not yet." The women turned to her in confusion. "We must first gather our daughters," she explained. "If we bring them together and hear their voices as one, the elders will have no choice but to believe us." The mothers nodded in agreement. And so, they set out to find their daughters, one by one. And by the time the moon had risen high, a group of 20 young girls stood beneath the baobab tree, their eyes full of shame, fear, and relief. For the first time, they could speak freely. And when the first girl finally told her story, the floodgates opened. One by one, the girls spoke. One by one, their voices rose. One by one, they brought Jide's crimes into the light. And when they were done, the village mothers turned to Mama Folek. "What do we do now?" Mama Folek's eyes flashed like fire. "We gather the village. We bring this to the elders. And we end this nightmare, tonight." The first whisper of truth. The village of Odo-Aye had long been a place of peace. But peace is fragile when built on secrets and silence. And that night, under the glow of the moon, the silence finally shattered. The elders are summoned. Mama Folek wasted no time. She sent messengers running to gather the elders, warriors, and the chief of the village. "Tell them it is urgent," she commanded. "Tell them the future of Odo-Aye is at stake." The elders arrived first, their faces lined with wisdom and concern. Then came the warriors, strong men who had fought in distant battles but now stood ready to protect their own daughters. Finally, Baba-Aye, the most respected elder, stepped forward. He looked at Mama Folek with grave eyes. "You have gathered the village," he said. "Speak, woman, and tell us why." Mama Folek turned to the girls, standing close together beneath the baobab tree. "Speak, my daughters," she said gently. "Tell them what you have told us." The girls hesitated. Fear still clung to them, whispering in their minds. "No one will believe you. You will be blamed. Jide will find a way to escape." But then, Aduni stepped forward. She looked at the elders, the warriors, the mothers, and the fathers of the village, and she knew. This was their only chance. With a deep breath, she spoke the truth. The floodgates opened. "It was Mr. Jide," she said, her voice trembling but clear. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "He called us for private lessons," Aduni continued, tears forming in her eyes. "He told us it was to help us learn more. But it was a lie." The crowd grew still. Then, another girl stepped forward. "And when he was done," she whispered, "he told us to stay quiet. That no one would believe us." Another girl. And another. And another. Until all 20 girls had spoken. Their words wove together like the threads of a painful tapestry, each voice a stone thrown into the silence. By the time they finished, the air was thick with anger and sorrow. The village erupted. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, Odo-Aye spoke. His voice was like thunder, deep and powerful. "Where is this man?" The crowd roared in agreement. "Bring him," someone shouted. "He must face judgment." The warriors grabbed their spears. The mothers lit torches. The men of the village marched forward, their fury lighting the night. Justice would not wait for morning. They were going to find Jide. They were going to make him answer. And there would be no escape. Jide's attempt to escape. Meanwhile, Jide sat in his small hut, unaware that his world was crumbling around him. He hummed to himself, writing in his notebook, thinking about which girl he would call next for a lesson. But then, a shadow moved outside his window. Jide froze. Then, a panicked voice whispered through the darkness. "Jide!" Jide jumped to his feet, heart pounding. The door burst open, and Mako, the village troublemaker, stumbled inside, sweating and out of breath. "They know," Mako gasped. "The girls, they told everyone." Jide's blood ran cold. He dropped his notebook. "What do you mean, they told?" he demanded. "I mean the elders are coming." Mako hissed. "The whole village is outside. They have torches, spears, they are coming for you." Jide felt the walls closing in. His charm would not save him now. His smile would not protect him. He had only one option. "Help me escape," he whispered. "Before they get here." Mako hesitated. Then, slowly, he nodded. But neither of them knew. It was already too late. The capture of the betrayer. Jide and Mako crept through the back of the hut, moving toward the dark path that led to the river. "If we reach the river," Mako whispered, "we can steal a boat and escape before sunrise." Jide nodded, his breath quick and shallow. But as they reached the trees, a voice rang out. "Stop there." Jide and Mako froze. Dozens of warriors stepped out from the shadows, their spears glinting in the moonlight. Behind them, the entire village stood, their torches burning like a second sunrise. "You thought you could run?" Odo-Aye's voice boomed. Jide's legs gave out beneath him. "Please," he stammered. "You don't understand." A warrior struck him across the face, silencing him. Mako tried to run, but strong hands grabbed him and threw him to the ground. The villagers closed in, their faces filled with anger and betrayal. And as they dragged Jide and Mako back to the village square, one thing was clear. The time for justice had come. The storm begins. The night air in Odo-Aye was thick with fury. The villagers moved like a great wave, their torches lighting up the darkness as they dragged Jide and Mako back to the village square. No one spoke. No one smiled. Tonight was not a night for forgiveness. Tonight was a night for justice. The judgment begins. Baba-Aye stood before the baobab tree, the sacred gathering place of the elders. His face, usually filled with wisdom and patience, was now hardened like stone. Jide and Mako knelt in the dirt, their hands bound behind their backs. The entire village had gathered. Mothers stood with their daughters. Fathers clutched their spears. Warriors lined the square, their eyes burning with anger. This was no ordinary judgment. This was a reckoning. Baba-Aye raised his aged hands, and the crowd fell silent. He looked down at Jide, his voice low but powerful. You came to us as a teacher, he said. We trusted you with our daughters. We believed you were here to help. His voice grew sharper. But instead, you have brought shame upon our village. You have brought suffering upon our daughters. And now, you will answer for it. The crowd murmured in agreement. Jide kept his head low, his once confident smile gone. He knew. There was no escape. The testimonies of the broken. Baba-Aye turned to the young girls, standing together beneath the torchlight. You have suffered at the hands of this man, he said. Now, speak your truth. The first girl stepped forward, Aduni. Her hands trembled, but her voice was clear and strong. He told us we were special, she said. That he wanted to help us. She swallowed back tears. But he lied. Her words cracked the air like thunder. Then, Mariel stepped forward. He told us that if we spoke, no one would believe us, she said. But we are not afraid anymore. One by one, the other girls spoke, their voices breaking the chains of silence. Each testimony was a dagger. Each word was a wound in Jide's fate. And by the time the last girl had spoken, the villagers' fury could no longer be contained. The call for punishment. He must pay, a father roared. Let him feel what our daughters have felt, a mother wept. The warriors raised their spears, ready to tear Jide apart. But Baba-Aye lifted his hand, and the crowd fell silent once more. This village has rules, he said. And we do not act in blind rage. We act with wisdom. He turned back to Jide. You will not die, he said. Not yet. The crowd gasped. Jide lifted his head, hope flashing in his eyes. But Baba-Aye's next words crushed that hope instantly. You will stay here, in this village, he continued. You will care for every girl you have wronged. You will work for them. You will feed them. You will answer to their families. And you will do so until your last breath. Jide's face fell into despair. The warriors grabbed him and shoved him to the ground. You will never be free again, Baba-Aye declared. Your life is no longer your own. It belongs to them now. The villagers roared in agreement. Mako's fate. Baba-Aye turned to Mako, the man who had helped Jide in his betrayal. You are no better than the serpent who waits in the shadows, Baba-Aye said. Mako shook his head violently. I didn't do anything, he screamed. I only. You are guilty, Baba-Aye cut him off. And your punishment will be just as severe. Mako began to shake. You will not be put to death, Baba-Aye said. But you will walk under the burning sun. You will labor for the village. You will carry the heaviest burdens. And you will do so until your body breaks. The warriors grabbed Mako as he wailed in terror. Please, he screamed. Please, mercy. But the village had no mercy left for traitors. And as Mako was dragged away, the villagers felt a weight lift from their shoulders. The darkness that had once settled over their daughters was finally lifting. A village rebuilt. In the days that followed, Odo-Aye began to heal. Jide, once a respected teacher, was now a broken man, forced to serve the very people he had betrayed. Every day, he worked in silence, bringing food to the families of the girls he had harmed. Everywhere he walked, he carried shame like a second skin. Marco, once a man who took what he wanted, was now a laborer, toiling in the fields beneath the sun's harsh gaze. The village watched them closely, ensuring they never forgot their crimes. And the girls who had once been afraid now walked with their heads high. They had been broken. But they had rebuilt themselves from the ashes. The lesson that would never be forgotten. Years passed, and Jide and Marco remained in Odo-Aye, bound by their punishment. And the story of the teacher who betrayed the village became a lesson told to every child, passed down from generation to generation. A warning. A reminder. A truth that would never be forgotten. And so, Odo-Aye remained strong. Because they had learned the most important lesson of all. Silence is the enemy of justice. And justice is the shield of the innocent. The trial of the teacher. The village of Odo-Aye had spoken. Jide's crimes had been revealed, his lies torn apart by the voices of the girls he had once deceived. But justice was not yet complete. The village had passed judgment, but now, the gods would decide his fate. The ritual of truth. In Odo-Aye, no major punishment was given without consulting the spirits of the ancestors. And so, as the morning sun rose, the entire village gathered in the sacred grove. The air was heavy with the scent of burning herbs. The elders stood in a circle, dressed in white robes. And at the center, Jide knelt, bound and trembling. Odo-Aye stepped forward, holding a bowl filled with sacred water. Jide, he said, his voice cold. You have been found guilty by the people. But before your punishment is sealed, we must ask the ancestors. Jide's breath came fast and shallow. This was the final test. If the gods saw him as truly guilty, there would be no escape. Odo-Aye raised the bowl to the sky. O great spirit of our fathers, he called. Hear us today. If this man is innocent, let this water remain clear. But if he is guilty, let it turn black, as dark as his deeds. The villagers held their breath. Odo-Aye poured the water onto a sacred stone, a stone that had been in Odo-Aye for hundreds of years. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the water turned as dark as midnight. The crowd gasped. Jide screamed in horror. The gods have spoken, Odo-Aye declared. This man is guilty before heaven and earth. A roar erupted from the crowd. Now, there was no doubt. Jide's punishment would be carried out. Jide's final plea. Jide fell to the ground, his body shaking. Please, he cried. I was misled. It was not my fault. The villagers jeered in disgust. Not your fault, a mother shouted. You deceived our daughters. You shamed our people, another voice rang out. Jide turned to Odo-Aye, desperation in his eyes. Give me one more chance, he begged. Let me prove myself. But Odo-Aye shook his head. You have already proven who you are, he said. Now, you must live with what you have done. Jide's shoulders sagged. There would be no mercy. The sealing of fate. Odo-Aye turned to the warriors. Take him, he commanded. Bind him in chains of iron. He will live the rest of his life in servitude, working for those he has harmed. The warriors stepped forward, grabbing Jide roughly. They placed iron shackles on his wrists, heavy and unbreakable. The weight of the chains crushed any hope he had left. Jide, who had once been respected, now stood as the lowest of the low. A man with no name, no honor, no future. A warning to all who thought they could betray the innocent and escape justice. The fate of Marco. Mako, Jide's accomplice, stood nearby, his face pale with fear. Odo-Aye turned to him. "You," he said, "are a snake who hides in the shadows. You let evil grow. You let innocence be destroyed." Mako fell to his knees. "Please, Odo-Aye," he cried. "I was weak. I did not stop him, but I did not touch the girls. I swear." Odo-Aye's eyes were hard. "But you knew, and you did nothing." The warriors grabbed Mako, dragging him forward. "You will labor in the fields," Odo-Aye said. "You will build our roads, carry our water, and work for the village you have betrayed." The warriors pushed him into the dirt, marking the beginning of his punishment. He would spend his days as a servant. His name would be a curse. And he would never know freedom again. A new dawn for Odo-Aye. With Jide and Mako bound in their punishment, the village began to heal. The young girls who had suffered were not broken, they rose stronger. They walked through the village with their heads high, no longer burdened by fear. Their mothers held them close, promising to never let such a thing happen again. The elders rewrote the village laws, ensuring that no man could ever deceive them like Jide had. Odo-Aye had been scarred. But scars do not mean weakness. They mean survival. And the village had survived. The legend lives on. Many years later, long after Jide and Mako had faded into obscurity, the story of what happened remained. Fathers told their sons, "Respect women, or you will end up like Jide." Mothers told their daughters, "If you see something wrong, speak up, like Aduni and Ton did." And every night, by the light of the village fires, the elders would tell the story of the teacher who thought he was untouchable, but learned that even the mightiest can fall. Because in Odo-Aye, one thing would always be true. Justice is patient. Justice is relentless. And justice never forgets. Justice and redemption. The village of Odo-Aye had witnessed the fall of a man who thought himself untouchable. Jide, the once admired teacher, had been reduced to nothing more than a servant, bound by chains of his own making. Mako, his accomplice, had been condemned to a life of labor, his name spoken only in whispers of disgrace. But justice was only the first step. Now, the village had to heal. And healing would take time. The years of servitude. Jide's punishment was not a quick one. Every morning, he rose before the sun, carrying water from the river to the homes of the families he had betrayed. Every day, he worked under the scorching sun, tending to the farms of the mothers whose daughters he had deceived. And every night, he was given no rest, forced to clean the schoolyard where he had once taught, his hands scraping the very ground he had dishonored. The village watched him carefully. He was never left alone. He was never trusted again. He had no voice, no power, no future beyond serving the very people he had wronged. But the greatest punishment was not the labor. It was the shame. The looks of disgust from the villagers. The mothers who turned their backs on him. The girls who once admired him, now refusing to even acknowledge his existence. And deep in his heart, Jide realized. This was a fate worse than death. Mako's curse. Mako, too, suffered under the weight of his punishment. He had always been a man who lived for himself, surviving by taking advantage of others. But in Odo-Aye, he was no longer free. From dawn till dusk, he walked in the fields, his hands blistered and bleeding. The warriors watched over him, making sure he never dared speak to the young girls again. And the villagers never let him forget. You helped a snake, they told him. You turned a blind eye to evil. And now, you will pay for it until your body gives out. Mako lived in silence, knowing that he would never again be a part of the village. He was an outsider. A ghost among the living. The strength of the girls. Though the scars of the past would never fully fade, the girls of Odo-Aye refused to be broken. One by one, they returned to their studies. They walked through the village with strength, no longer afraid to use their voices. Odo-Aye, once the brightest student, became the first girl in the village's history to leave for the city and continue her education. And she was not the last. The tragedy that had almost ruined them had instead made them stronger. The girls learned that they were not powerless. That their voices mattered. That they could change their own destinies. And for the first time in the history of Odo-Aye, the future belonged to them. The teacher's last days. Jide's body grew weak with time. The years of hard labor and constant shame had drained him of everything. One evening, as the sun set over the village, he sat by the river, staring at his reflection in the water. He no longer recognized the man looking back at him. His once smooth skin was now rough and weathered. His once confident eyes were dull and lifeless. His once proud voice was now only a whisper. He had nothing left. No family. No legacy. No future. And for the first time in his life, Jide understood. He had thought himself above justice. But in the end, justice had found him anyway. The lesson that would never be forgotten. The story of Jide and Marco became a warning. Fathers told their sons, respect women, or you will end up like Jide. Mothers told their daughters, if you see something wrong, speak up, like Odo-Aye and Ton did. And every night, by the light of the village fires, the elders told the story. Of the teacher who betrayed his people. Of the boy who saw the truth. Of the girls who refused to remain silent. Of the village that stood together and demanded justice. And so, in Odo-Aye, one thing remained true. Justice is patient. Justice is relentless. And justice never forgets.